righty, traders. This is Blake Morrow, and you are listening to the Morning Edge webinar. I'm going to welcome you, and this is the moment you all have been waiting for. Well, at least some of you have been waiting for. I know some people don't really care about politics at all, but you know, I do. I do. And definitely has been somewhat entertaining over the course of the last several months. So anyway, with that being said, I'm going to bring in Mr. Bob Lehman. Let me find him really quick. There he is. Bob, can you hear me?
I can.
Good morning.
Good morning, Blake. How are you?
I'm doing great. How in the hell have you been?
I've been tremendous. I've been a little bit quiet on your webinar. I still do listen in, but I got 2 new puppies recently, and they are a handful.
Congratulations. You know, I think that's what happens when your kids go to college. You have to replace them with puppies.
That's what my wife thought anyway.
Well, congratulations. What kind of dogs did you get?
They are 2 rat terriers.
Wow.
One is a full-size one, and one is kind of a semi-mini, and they are a handful and a half.
Oh my gosh! You know, when we had a toy fox terrier when my wife and I first got together, and it was before we got married. We had a toy fox terrier, and which is very similar to your rat terrier, and she was just so much fun. And you know, one thing that I had experienced, and I don't know if you have or maybe will experience, I used to throw her the ball, and she would never get the ball. I would say, "Go get the ball," and then one day the switch flipped, and I threw the ball, and she would get the ball, and all of a sudden her eyes started going in opposite directions and spinning around in circles, and she became psychotic and would only want to catch the ball for the next 15 years of her life. It was the craziest thing. Actually 13 years of her life, but I was joking about her eyes going in opposite direction, but she got so crazy about throwing the ball that that's all she wanted to do ever. But it was so fun. So hopefully you have a great time, and I'm sure they are keeping you really occupied. What are the names?
Oh, that's for sure. that in this interesting political campaign.
Yes. Okay. So let's talk. I'm excited to have you here because obviously this political season has been the most, well, in my lifetime, definitely the most unique. And I don't think I can remember a time where things have been, you know, and I know I'm a few years younger, and maybe you have some idea of when things have been. So I use I say unique, but how would you define this political environment?
Well, it is unique. It's unique in a lot of different aspects. I mean, you have an electorate, which, I mean, we live in a representative democracy, which is not a democracy. But unfortunately, for the politicians, they have to, and let me just say at the onset, and you've said it before, but I am decidedly not a party affiliate. I am not partisan. I will not and do not vote for either Democrats or Republicans. I think they're ridiculous. But what happens is every 4 years in terms of the presidential election, every 2 years for reps and every 6 for senators, they are required to go in front of the electorate. And I think they find, many of them at least, find this extraordinarily problematic and kind of a pain in the ass. You know, they would rather just merely go to their donors and be designated, you know, the nominee or the person that gets elected. And what you've had here is you know, ostensibly a very wealthy man in Donald Trump, again, ostensibly putting his own money forward. There are plenty of reports that, in fact, he is actually lending the money to his campaign and intends to get it back and repay those loans were he to get the nomination. But he is self-funded, to, you know, again, with parentheses around it.
Right.
and he's thrown the Republican Party at least into into conniption fits.
Yeah, like massive turmoil. Right.
Yeah. And frankly, on the Democratic side, it's not a heck of a lot different. Hillary Clinton, again, declared her nomination, or her desire to get the nomination, and thought she was going to run largely unopposed, and essentially was unopposed. I mean, a longtime senator from the state of Vermont who has never had a job, and that is the fact. I mean, even though he graduated from the University of Chicago, he never had a job outside of politics, decided to run. He had no national name recognition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what you've seen there is also a very interesting political campaign. I think that Hillary certainly will get the nomination on the Democratic side, but it shows something extraordinarily troubling about her as a candidate, irrespective of what you think about her personally or what you think about her legally. Politically, it's really disturbing.
No, so can I ask, because of that point, when you're talking about like Bernie Sanders, you can say, well, maybe it is disturbing about Hillary's campaign, which I agree with you, by the way. I mean, she's got a lot of, skeletons in the closet. She's, going back to her and Bill Clinton's relationship. I mean, there's a lot of things that are morally wrong about her being president. And you got like people like my wife, who's a Democrat. She's a staunch Democrat. And she says, listen, just because she's a woman doesn't mean that she has any right to be the first woman president. Just because she's a woman, I'm not going to vote for her just because she's a woman. And I think that maybe she believes that she should be, or maybe she has this entitled to being the first woman president, but I think a lot of women feel that way. But I wanted to point out like Bernie Sanders, but isn't it really interesting, Bob, that maybe what it says about Bernie Sanders, and it's kind of the same thing with Trump, is that it shows you that anybody can run, and how amazing that. And I don't agree with a lot of things that Bernie Sanders says, believe me, but how amazing is that he's got so much grassroots support that has taken him this far. And that's
absolutely unfathomable, frankly. I mean, he had no money, he had no infrastructure, and he is raising very small donations online. And frankly, this is the problem that the Hillary campaign is dealing with. They're running low on funds because they raised money in Hollywood and from big money donors, and they can't tap into that. But Bernie can re-tap into the guy and the woman that sent $50 or $25.
Right.
And that is exactly what's happening. He raised $40 million last month. $40 million.
That's amazing. But doesn't that suggest to you, Bob, that anybody could run? I mean, if he could run, anybody could run? I mean, that's what it tells me,
Hey, you might be right. I mean, I've really spent a lot of time contemplating the very issue that you're putting forward. Trump is fairly unique in that he has capital that he can allocate, or funds available to him that he can allocate. Again, I'll say lend to the campaign with parentheses around it. I don't know. I mean, this is the question that both political parties are going to be asking themselves in spades. They are already asking themselves, and they will continue to ask themselves. Can anybody run? I don't know. I mean, yeah. you had a really obscure senator from the state of Vermont that has very little in terms of legislative history behind him. He hasn't really done a whole hell of a lot other than, he had a veterans bill a couple of years ago that was jointly supported by a Republican, but he really has very little in terms of a record. And again, he was not part of the Democratic Party until the primaries began.
Right. Okay, so now when you take these like anomalies, I call them anomalies because it's like I look at Donald Trump, and I mean, you can think whatever you want of him, and I mean, I've definitely got views on Donald Trump, but he has done what would be considered the unthinkable thus far, and same with Bernie Sanders, right?
Indeed. I mean, the fact that Bernie Sanders won in Michigan yesterday is,
And why is that? And explain to everybody, why is that?
Well, it appears that there was a large influx of basically college students or young people that did vote, and a decreased number of African Americans that did not vote, and that led to the polling being off, and hence to the Bernie Sanders victory.
Interesting. So, okay, Bob. Now, and you know what I should have done initially is do you mind really quick, and I hate to do it right now, but we got to, can you explain to people, I know some people have heard you before, people that have listened here for years, I know you've listened to the Wise Grid webinars for a few years yourself. Could you tell a little bit of everybody about yourself so they understand who you are, and please explain that is not your picture that's on your Twitter profile.
Yeah, that's not my picture. That was a guy that showed up on Fox News one day who I thought was extraordinarily comical. But my history was I was born and raised in Chicago, went to Indiana University, went to law school at Rutgers in New Jersey, lived and worked in the New York, New Jersey area for a little over 20 years. Then I have been on a magical mystery tour following my wife, who's a very accomplished attorney, first to Wichita, Kansas for a brief period of time, and then I spent the last 6 years in Nashville. So, and what happened was a number of years ago, about 9 years ago, I ended up retiring because my middle son had kidney issues. His kidneys failed. He has since become a kidney transplant recipient, but managing his life and our needs, we were just paying so many people. And my wife at the time had a job with a private equity company that was about 40 minutes away in New Jersey, and it wasn't working. We were throwing so many balls in the air. So I retired, became an accomplished cook, and decided to really go full bore into trading. And so read a ton of books and found you and found some people that are smart, a lot smarter than me, and learned some things.
Awesome. So you've been a trader, and you know I brought you in specifically to talk about politics and the markets because I know you've been a trader for years. But tell me a little bit about your political background and why people. Now I had to explain, and I'm sure you were listening in. I tried to explain to people that I'm not here to, and I don't think you are here to persuade anybody, one way or the other. But why should people know? Why should people know that you do know politics? You know about politics and what's happening in the environment.
Well, I spend a ridiculous portion of my time. I was semi-involved in politics as a little kid. I mean, I can remember my father hustling me to. He ran for school board and was a school board member for 20 some odd years or 30 years. I did that, and then I actually did some work in the Democratic Party, which if you're from Chicago, you certainly understand that at least historically the Democratic Party ruled the city. And
yes, that's where my wife's family was from, by the way, her American side. So yes, I get that.
Right. And through that, I got a summer job working for the county and Again, then I went to college, then law school, and my disaffection at not only the Democrats but the Republicans and just the entire political system in this country really began to wane. And I think about it'll be about almost nearly 20 years ago, I stopped voting for either Republicans or Democrats because I just found them contemptuous.
Okay, and that would be about the okay. Now, well, let me ask you this: Do you vote, or do you just vote? You vote for the candidate that you feel is most in line with your thinking?
I do vote. I do vote. Every election, I do definitely vote. I pay particular attention to local elections, but in federal elections, I vote against the incumbent, and and I vote. I think the last two elections, I voted just for the last person on the presidential ballot. You know, whatever name it was, whatever party it was, I paid no attention. I haven't taken to writing in names, but I am considering writing in Blake Morrow this year.
No, don't. Okay, but that's okay. So, and you've done some political blogging, and you spend a lot of time talking about politics. And so, if you follow Bob, and by the way, his Twitter handle is IUU Bob on Twitter, and there's a story behind the IUU Bob is his handle. But if you follow Bob, just Bob does tweet a lot about politics, and you do spend a lot of your time talking about politics and the whatnot. So, with that being said, let's talk about let's go back to, and thank you, by the way, for your the explanation of your background. Even though I've known your background, it's really it's good for everybody else to hear it as well. Let's talk about the Republican Party a little bit, and let's talk about like the four guys that are representing the Republican Party. And I laugh because I am a registered Republican, but I'll tell you, Bob, over the last, you say 20 years, I would say over the last 20 years, probably, maybe last 15 years, I've become very disenchanted, like yourself, with either party, and so I've become more of an independent at this point in my life. But let's talk a little bit about the Republican race. This is a very interesting race, isn't it?
Indeed, it is.
Okay, so what do you have to say about it?
Well, let's just kind of go through the candidates one by one. You have John Kasich, who was a fairly successful member of Congress. Then, subsequently, I guess about 7 years ago, became governor of the state of Ohio, which is important because it's a swing state. But he is decidedly, at least the view of him in the body politic is that he's kind of middle of the road Republican, kind of an old school Republican, if you will.
Right.
Then you have Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio has had nothing less than a meteoric rise to the top. Coming out of law school at the University of Miami, he went full bore into politics. Started on a local level, moved to a state level, became head of the House, basically akin to the House of Representatives in Florida. Then decided to run against Charlie Crist for the Florida Senate seat. Charlie Crist was the former governor of the state of Florida, has since switched parties from the Republicans to the Democrats, but Marco was a decided underdog in that race. He grabbed upon the Tea Party banner at that point in time. This was 2010. And if people remember, that's kind of when the Tea Party was at its height. Thank you, Rick Santelli, I guess.
Right, yeah, exactly.
But Marco then moved on to the Senate, where he got some nice positions in committee work, but hasn't really, as is evidenced by his record, hasn't really spent a lot of time there, either building coalitions within the government, or even attending meetings and such, or voting. But the body politic, that is, quote unquote, the establishment Republican Party, decided to weigh in with him. He had a metaphorically disastrous day yesterday. I mean, absolutely abysmal. He got 0 delegates yesterday. 0.
Wow.
He is absolutely limping into his home state of Florida, which latest polling I saw this morning was he is 16 points behind Donald Trump.
Wow. Okay. And do you feel that way, that maybe he's that way? And here this is kind of a point, and I know we got to get through Cruz and Trump as well. But do you feel a lot of that is because he really is trying to catering to the evangelical vote as well? And when did the when did Republicans swing so far that direction? Because that's been, maybe is that a Bush era kind of where they attacked, trying to get the religious vote. I mean, because go ahead. I'm sorry.
In the South, where quote unquote the evangelical vote predominates, the Republican party's had a hold on it for a long time. I mean, it goes back theoretically to the Reagan administration. So it really does go back a long time to relatively the early 80s. But what appears in this election to be quite interesting is the evangelicals have broken for Mr. Trump, which despite him carrying around the Bible his mother gave him, is a decided, anybody that knows him, and again, having lived in New York and New Jersey for the vast majority of my adult life, I know Mr. Trump well. My wife actually clerked for his sister, who is not on the U.S. Court of Appeals. So I know Donald quite well, and I think that the people who lived in New York, New Jersey are particularly aghast at this whole scenario with as I term him, #rump. Basically carrying the Republican election today.
Right. Okay. So let's get to Trump. But how about Cruz? Tell me a little bit about Cruz, because from what I understand, Cruz is not liked within his own party.
He is universally despised. Mr. Cruz graduated from Harvard Law School, took a clerkship job with the Court of Appeals, a very prestigious position, ostensibly did well, a very conservative judge who had been considered for a Supreme Court appointment at certain times, was then recommended by that judge for a Supreme Court clerkship, which, as you may well expect, is extraordinarily prestigious. He got that, wrote opinions, and if you go into the details, and I won't bore the body politic with all the details, but was an extraordinary advocate for his point of view. From there, he then joined the Bush campaign and was involved, although there is some dispute as to how much involved, in the Bush v. Gore lawsuit that went on in Florida over the voting. He anticipated a relatively high position within the Bush administration. That is also where he met his wife, by the way. But anyway, he ended up getting an ancillary role at the Federal Trade Commission, which he didn't really love or like, and kind of kept looking around. Now, he had not been back to Texas since he left for Princeton University, where he went undergrad, and saw that the Solicitor General job had opened up. That is a job that works for the Attorney General of the state of Texas. Generally, that position handles appeals motions. He decided to run for that job. As I have read in multiple reports, he put a TV in his office and was watching cable news. He was a strenuous advocate for his positions. Also filed a ton of amicus briefs. And amicus briefs are friend of the court briefs for issues that don't necessarily impact the state in which you represent, but other states that you say that you have an ancillary interest in.
Okay.
He then from there, it was recommended Greg Abbott, who is now the governor of the state of Texas, was his mentor, his godfather, so to speak, his, whatever, within the Republican establishment. What's also interesting about Ted Cruz is throughout his life, if you go all the way back to Princeton University when he was a freshman, no one has really liked him. He's not a well-liked individual. He's got a caustic personality. He is very sure of himself, but he's not a well-liked individual.
Okay.
He was then able to run for Senate, and actually in the Republican primary for Texas Senate, he ended up beating a candidate that was supported by the standard Republican Party in Texas, and again won it with Tea Party support. And that vaulted him to the Senate. In the Senate, he is universally disliked. His main friend in the Senate is Senator Mike Lee of Utah. Interestingly enough, Senator Mike Lee did endorse a candidate for president, and it was Marco Rubio.
Your only friend.
Yeah,
endorse somebody else.
His most prominent endorsement to date has been Representative Steve King, who referred to Mexican illegal immigrants as having cantaloupe calves.
Oh my gosh! Oh
yeah,
my gosh!
Stephen King is a whole other subject in and of itself.
Wow. Okay, so that's Ted Cruz. Now, speaking of offending Hispanics, tell us a little bit about Trump, especially for those European. We have a lot of Europeans, Asians, not just non-Americans that are listening into this webinar. Obviously, it's a currency webinar, so we've got a lot of people that don't even live in the United States. Tell us a little bit about Donald Trump and your.
Well, Donald Trump, has been well chronicled, came from a fairly wealthy family. His father was a developer in Queens and in Brooklyn, not in Manhattan, and amassed a good deal of wealth. He did eventually pass that wealth to his children, of which there were 4. So the $200 million you hear, ostensibly Donald probably got about $50 million of that. And again, I'm not going to sit here and say it was 55 million or 60 million, but
Right.
Basically 50 million. Donald Trump immediately headed to the pages of the Daily News and the New York Post, which anybody that's from the area or anybody that kind of follows Twitter probably has seen their headlines. They are 2 tabloid papers based in New York. He engendered a great deal of antipathy from the local press because he is and has always been a huge self-promoter. And he's done some deals that have gone very well for him. It's interesting, later in life he has moved on to this golf course circuit, but he was also involved in casinos in Atlantic City, New Jersey, of which they were summarily unsuccessful. He is also engaged in really selling his name.
Right.
What he does is he licenses his name more often than he actually engages in the project itself, because that's been more advantageous to him.
Yeah, I mean it has. I mean you see all these interviews of voters that are I want to say lesser educated voters. They just associate Trump with success. They just say, oh well, it's Donald Trump. He must be successful. It's just a successul name, brand.
That's it precisely, and I think that's what so many market participants are based in the tri-state area of New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and know him extraordinarily well.
Right.
And so this I think this makes them crazier than anybody about Mr. Trump.
So tell us a little bit about your I got views of all the candidates, my own views, but let's hear about like your personal experiences with Donald Trump, being from New Jersey, and why you are not you're disenchanted with him.
Well, I mean, I'm not necessarily disenchanted with him. I mean, let me just say this: at first, when he first ran, he was universally discounted by members of the Republican Party and what the people I term the talking heads, particularly the Weekly Standard and the National Review. And they basically ignored him. And they have allowed this to happen. Again, historically, if you look back, Trump was essentially a Democrat. Is not unusual for New York politics. I don't know the last time they even elected. Certainly not in my lifetime they've elected a Republican to to be mayor. I mean, if you want to say Rudy Giuliani, but Rudy Giuliani didn't run as a Republican to start with. It's a whole other scenario with him. Ostensibly, he was relatively conservative, but that is a clear outlier in the process. So we, again, those of us who grew up in New York and New Jersey, have a history with him. He's done some things that are quote unquote noteworthy, but he's had 3 marriages. His first marriage being to Ivana Trump, Czechoslovakian. He then hooked up with Marla Maples, who actually played golf with Donald at the country club that I was a member at the time. His sister was a member there, and she was actually taken off the course for having shorts that were too short. Marla Maples, in the day while she fell off the radar, she was quite a fetching catch at one point. So,
sure.
He's got a decidedly colored history, but I think that the body politic really underestimated how ticked off the voters were at quote unquote career politicians.
And that's where he's getting a lot of his support. But let me ask you this about Donald Trump, and he's obviously been in the highlight. He's the highlight reel, and it's almost like bad press is good press. That type of thing. He at first, in my opinion, he came onto the scene and he said a lot of things that people said, yeah, oh God, that makes sense. Tell us like it is. But as the months have gone on, he really has the same sales pitch. He says the same thing over and over and over again. He provides no details, and it's become very apparent, at least to me and most of the people that I associate with, that he's just a salesperson, and he's just he tells people what they want to hear at that time. And it was really interesting at this Fox News debate, the last debate, and I've watched most of the debates, but the last one that he did with Megyn Kelly, how she really threw that highlight reel. She was going to come at him aggressively. She threw that highlight reel about him just flip-flopping on different subject matters, which are important ones too. But you can tell that was a real clear indication that he just tells people what they want to hear at that moment.
I think that's largely the case, but again, I mean, I'll say that's part of his appeal. Part of his appeal is that if he says something that's wrong, or that's proven wrong, he'll just backtrack on it and say, well, no, I really don't think that. I can't really do that. Whether it's the waterboarding or whatever else. Again, which I found very interesting. All these proponents of waterboarding for so long and how valuable it was. Now that it's essentially quote unquote illegal. They all of a sudden became proponents of the fact that it was illegal. But he is willing to change. Our politicians, having basically dealing with the consultant class, has told him never change, and for Donald it's worked.
Yeah. Okay. So now we can get back to the Republican Party, but let's talk a little bit about the 2 Democrats here. You got Hillary Clinton, which obviously I'm sure we've got all things to say about her, and Bernie Sanders. Can you explain? I think most people understand some of the background. You talked about Bernie Sanders. How about Hillary Clinton? I mean, she's this juggernaut in the Democratic Party, who obviously has a lot of experience. But
she clearly does. What's interesting about Hillary Clinton? Hillary Clinton has been a lightning rod virtually her whole career, with the exception of when she was in the Senate. All information that you can find out about her in the Senate was that actually the people that worked with her thought she was a good colleague. Now, again, I'll stress that with Hillary Clinton, the difference is between the voters and the politicians. The politicians kind of could deal with her, but the voters don't like her. They have never liked her. They didn't like her since Bill Clinton's administration, and they still don't like her. I mean, this is unbelievable. It calls into question exactly how strong a candidate Obama was, because Hillary Clinton is a profoundly weak candidate.
Right.
And frankly, and I'm no fan of Vice President Biden, but I think, again, one of my hashtags is Dopey Joe, because Dopey Joe graduated, I think, 73rd or 76th out of 83 graduates from the University of Syracuse in law school. But he was able to find a job in politics. That's the great thing about America. It didn't happen. But I think Dopey Joe could have taken this. I think Dopey Joe could have taken it on the Democrats.
Right. Well, okay. So you got Hillary Clinton, and you're right. I think you're right. The voters just don't appeal to her. I mean, you talk again. I just use my wife as a reference, but I can say a lot of my wife's friends and people that you would think would appeal to women voters, Democratic voters. They don't like her. Now but here's what it comes down to. In my opinion, let's just say, for argument's sake, we've got Hillary Clinton up against Donald Trump. Now we should probably talk about what's going to happen with the Republican Party should Trump get all the delegates. What could happen with the three-part? I need a better understanding of that anyway, and I'm sure everybody else does. But let's just say Trump and Clinton are on the ticket. Will people vote people will vote for Hillary Clinton because they feel that she would be a better leader, even though they don't like her? And how many voters will come out just to vote against Trump? I mean, I think that's like a viable question.
Well, I think on the Hispanic side, which again, if you go back to 2012, post-election, Reince Priebus initiated a study which said that the Republican Party needed to change its message to appeal to the Hispanic electorate. And what has basically happened in the current nomination process is Trump hijacked it from the get-go. If immigration was such a relatively small issue, if you go back to last June and July, it was such a small issue, but Trump made it, mega big. And it has really put the Republican Party in trouble, in my opinion.
Okay. Yes. Now, what's the Republican Party going to do here?
What it looks like, and what was interesting, I get up very early here, and I tend to roll through my Twitter stream as I'm reading articles. And what's very interesting is a lot of the talking heads have been pretty damn quiet today on the conservatives. I don't know that they know what they're going to do. Bill Kristol, who's a prominent member of the talking head class, but a lousy prognosticator for certain, has said that he believes, and a number of other people have said this, that he believes that the Republicans will start a third party, a conservative party, so to speak, and run a candidate. Whether that'll happen,
I heard Paul Ryan's name thrown out there.
Well, they keep. I saw an interesting tweet today that said we should nominate Paul. They should nominate Paul Ryan to the Supreme Court too, so he can cover all three branches. But practically speaking, I don't think Paul Ryan will or can do it. You need to understand, or what people need to understand, is that Paul Ryan is the Speaker of the House because the Republicans had nowhere else to go. Nowhere else to go.
Right.
They had a huge split there.
So who could be their candidate, do you think? Okay. I mean, if you had to start thinking of names.
Well, I don't think Mitt Romney, although I think ostensibly he's made himself open to being pulled into the nomination process. I don't think it would be him. I'm not sure where the heck they would go. I think it would just be a candidate ostensibly for members of the House and members of the Senate running for re-election to kind of hang their hat on. What is interesting here is that in the upcoming November elections, you have a very large, senators run 6-year terms, and then so they come up every 6 years, so it's not, doesn't necessarily always line up. I think you have 33 senators that are up for re-election this year. I could be mistaken in that. But you have a large number of those people seeking re-election are Republicans, and 5 to 7 of them are in ostensibly Democratic-leaning states. So you have a real problem for the Republicans on the Senate side of the equation. And that is
Right.
kind of little spoken of, but extraordinarily important in my view.
That's something that my wife and I talk about too. And let's talk about like the Republican establishment, the Republican Party, about how it's been really destroyed or disrupted by Trump, and I could point my finger at Trump and just say all of the candidates currently. I mean, what's the future of the Republican Party, Bob?
Right, I think that they really have to ask themselves this. I really think that a similar thing could have happened on the Democratic side of the equation as well. People, again, it's this inconvenient fact that these politicians have to be elected, and they're not liked. They're really not liked. And this whole intransience that has occurred in Washington, D.C. for now 8 years, or at least 6 years, and you can certainly expect it to continue, is unacceptable to the body politic. People are absolutely frustrated. The Federal Reserve, frankly, is frustrated, and this is where it impacts markets. They are extraordinarily frustrated. I mean, if you look back at what Ben Bernanke said, Ben Bernanke was saying that they have to put money into the economy, and not necessarily through where a third of the budget sits, which is defense, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. But they needed additional spending to put into the economy. I mean, we have a road structure and an airport structure in this country which is shameful. It's shameful. I mean,
Yes.
if you fly into LaGuardia, New York, in New York City, it is absolutely a pit. It's a pit.
Yes, it is. I agree with you. Now, Bob, okay, so let's because we only have 15 minutes left, and I just realized that we could stay here for hours, and I was thinking, man, an hour is not even enough to talk about all this. But let's talk about what would disrupt the economy the most, and my view would be Trump and Sanders. Okay, either or would disrupt the economy the most with where we currently sit. And you may agree or disagree, but what do you feel about how the economy is going to receive, let's say, a President Trump or a President Sanders or anybody else who you think might disrupt the economy?
I think that you're absolutely right that either of those two would be most disruptive. But I caution market participants about overreacting to that, because I think that the markets tend to overreact by the person whose name is associated with the presidency. As has been readily apparent over the last 6 years with President Obama, is that the president, absent getting Congress to line up with him, can't get anything done. So I think this whole thing, we talked about Bernie had once put out a paper that said the highest income people should pay 90%. That's never going to happen in this country. It's
Right.
never going to happen. And a bunch of the things that Trump has said are never going to happen. I mean, what we have got, in presidential campaigns, you get all these people put out their tax plans and stuff. I mean, I saw the numbers on Trump's tax proposal yesterday. Would add like between 11.3 trillion and 20.5 trillion to the deficit over 10 years. I mean, come on. And the Marco Rubio plan is silly. I don't know that that Hillary has really said anything, but what Sanders is promoting is absolutely ridiculous. It's just foolishness. But again, I caution market participants to not overreact to what happens in the presidency, because fundamentally they are somewhat limited. I mean, executive orders are relatively small potatoes.
Okay, all right. So it really depends on how things shake out with the with Congress and the Senate too.
That's exactly correct.
Okay, I got a few questions. Do you mind if you can answer a couple questions from some of our viewers?
I'm pleased.
Okay, Bob, and by the way, thank you for your generous time and generously giving your time and your thoughts and views about the political environment, because I'll tell you, and this has been the most interesting. It's like it is truly. I've been watching all the debates. My kids watch the debates. My kids have their opinions. We don't try to sway their opinions, and they're 8 and 11. And I'll tell you, it's the best TV I've seen in God 20 years at least.
It's a hoot.
It is so fun and so entertaining to watch. I mean, okay. So first question comes in from Ziggy, who he records. By the way,
I know who Ziggy is.
He records on his own. He is a client of WiseTrade. He's not an employee, and he uses his own equipment and records our videos, our Morning Edge every day. So I want to answer his question. He said, okay, he wanted you to talk a little bit about the election possibly going to Congress to decide. Example: Republicans deny Trump and runs a third party, or Republicans puts up an independent candidate, then no one gets the majority or of electoral college votes, gets sent to Congress to decide where the Republicans can put in anyone. He says, I think this is what the Republican establishment wants. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean that could happen, but that's based on electoral votes. I mean, again, you see a lot of polls that get put up, and they tend to be popular vote. Popular vote has nothing necessarily to do with electoral votes. There's some synergies there, but they're not necessarily aligned. I think if that happens, you'd certainly get a Republican, because the House would decide, and the House is decidedly Republican. And who they would decide, it's an open question. I don't think that there's any candidate. There's not somebody that everybody's waiting for. I don't know. Certainly the Democrats would, if it was a contested election, Hillary would be totally out. Ostensibly Trump would be out. But who they would find, I don't know. It's a question. Again, there's no leadership. I don't think they go back to Mitt Romney.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Now, for a lot of people, and it's funny. I just had my very Republican aunt and uncle came to visit the other day. They're very successful, wildly successful business people. Both of them work for large publicly traded companies. They're managing directors, vice presidents there, and they thought how refreshing it was. And they're like, we're from Arizona. We have the second largest Mormon population here in the United States, here in Arizona, next to Utah, obviously. We are no one in my family is Mormon, and but they said how refreshing it was to see Mitt Romney speak, and they were like, look, we look at Donald Trump, and these are people that send their kids to UCLA, PhDs, and one's getting a PhD. Both of them, three of them, gone to UCLA, gone on to get their master's degrees, different MBAs, different places, engineering degrees, whatnot. And they're like, look, Donald Trump is everything that we teach our kids not to be.
Okay.
And so how are we supposed to support somebody that acts the way he acts, and couldn't possibly represent our country? Then we got Mitt Romney, on the other hand, who made his speech, and even though he's supported Trump in the past, but his demeanor was refreshing compared to Donald Trump. They're like, he at least could represent our country, with the way that we would expect a presidential candidate to to act. I mean, is there a lot to be said about that? I thought that was
Well,
a fascinating observation.
I mean, I don't disagree, but that's kind of that's the reverend speaking to the choir. It is to say every post-election event that has measured this now says that really Mitt Romney's speech actually helped Trump. So that is to say that those who were already opposed to Trump said, "Bully, bully, bully, Mitt, way to talk," but they were already opposed to him. They didn't go
Yeah.
anywhere. So you're basically speaking. You're speaking to your mom and dad. It's not going anyplace.
Okay, so Patrick G, who you probably know him on Twitter because he
I
probably
do.
talks to you a lot. He says, "Can you please expand on the two criminal gang meme and discuss the way forward and beyond? I mean, how do we get past like these two broken establishments, Bob?"
Well, I mean, this goes back to George Washington. George Washington cautioned Americans not to devolve into political parties. But it has always been so. And what has happened over the years, and it continues to happen, is that they have changed the laws regarding getting on a ballot, getting on even a primary ballot, and they basically rigged the system. So undoing this is not easy, as was evidenced by Ross Perot, who put a ton of money, into the political election back when Clinton ran against Bush. So it's not easy. I don't know how it gets undone. I mean, I call them criminal gangs because they sit in when they're in these political campaigns, they try to tell the people what they think they want to hear, but they can't do anything about it, and they don't do anything about it. It's a bunch of BS.
Okay, and by the way, I'm getting a lot of comments about how people feel, that the markets are going to move based on, everybody's got, comments like that, but I'm actually seeking questions out that are asked specifically to you. David E. wrote in, he said, "Please ask Bob when you get the time is right, what's your current assessment of Chauncey Gardiner is, especially as it relates to foreign policy, Syria, Russia, etc."
Well, the Chauncey Gardiner is another hashtag I use, and that refers to President Obama, because Chauncey Gardiner was the main character in Being There, which is a Peter Sellers movie, which if you haven't watched it, you should watch it. But anyway, I think that what President Obama took from his election was that the U.S. had to scale back internationally, and that's what he's done. Much to the consternation of neoconservatives and much to the consternation of much of the public, and certainly allies abroad. Whether he's done that the way that everybody dreamed it up, I don't know, but it is problematic. I mean, the Russians in Syria, I've read a number of pieces that say that it wasn't so much about them supporting Assad or anything else. It was more about them screwing the U.S. and gaining political power. You had Netanyahu, who was ostensibly coming to meet with President Obama on Monday, canceled that trip as of yesterday. That was announced actually in the press. And if you listen to the Josh Earnest, who's the press secretary, was not told to them directly. I mean, it's disastrous. He is not respected. Mr. Obama is not respected in Europe. He is going from a guy who was, the king of the hill when he got elected, won the Nobel Prize before he had done anything, to a decidedly ancillary figure. He didn't handle the office the way it needed to be handled. He thought he could legislate or that he could dictate from on high. It's not done that way. It's invite him to the White House. It's shake hands. It's cajole. Negotiate. That's what it's about. And he didn't get that until recently, and then it was too late.
Interesting. This next comment. This comes from Tharun, who's in India, and this is an important comment, Bob, because this is a lot of foreigners' views. And and one of the things that scares me the most about Trump, and this because this question is regarding Trump, is how our neighbors, our allies, and the general population abroad would feel about Donald Trump. So he says, "Hey Blake, this is for Bob. I'm from India, and I was wondering if with Trump leading the Republican race, does this mean the majority of Republicans, which I'm assuming is around 50% of America, of the USA, agree with his views? Because the only thing that I read about him everywhere are his obnoxious comments. I find it difficult to fathom that people there would endorse such extreme views." And that's that's a common question amongst people that don't live here in the United States. What are your thoughts about that?
Right. Well, a couple of things. First off, the primary electorate is a very small slice of America. It is even a small slice of those who vote Republican. Current estimates of Republicans versus Democrats in the United States are that both parties show of committed constituents under 30%. So you basically have 40%, and I've seen it as high as 50%, that sit in the middle, that basically react to the people who are put up for office. I'll say another thing. Donald Trump has yet to exceed 50%. Well, he did have 50% in a couple of different of the primaries, but nationally he's not 50%. So his view is, and he's yet to consolidate support, which is extraordinarily interesting, and
Right.
which is probably more troubling to the Republican Party and even the Democrats as well, than anything else. I don't know if I was responsive there, Blake.
You were, but what that basically shows is that it's a very small slice of the electorate, and because there's 4 different candidates right now, the vote's being thinned out across the board, and so anyway, there are more questions, Bob, and we could go on for forever and a day on these topics, but I've got to turn it over to Steve here in a moment. But I want to say, thank you so much for spending the last hour with us and really bringing some light, especially to people that don't live here in the United States that are listening in right now, bringing some light to what we're currently dealing with here in the United States, and a very interesting race, and it's scary, it's interesting, it's entertaining, all at the same time, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me, Blake. I'm always available to you. I thank you for what you do every day. I follow you. I listen to the webinars. You just do a great job. If anybody has any questions that they want further, clarification or questions that weren't answered, they can follow me at IUU Bob. I tend to reply to virtually everybody. So.
And I put your Twitter handle in the chat box so everybody's got it. Bob, you are truly a gentleman and a saint. Thank you so much for joining us today. Kip, unfortunately, he's out sick, but Steve Bealby is here. Steve, are you here, and would you like to say something to Bob?
I am present, Balake.
Present.
Bob, it was very interesting. Thanks, Bob. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure, Steve. Good to speak with you.
Bob, thank you so much for being here, and I'll catch you in the Twitter sphere, and really appreciate you being so generous with your time today. Thank you so much, sir.
My pleasure. Bye now.
All right. And Steve, before you take over, let me put up the bias chart for everybody to take a picture of it before I go. What an interesting conversation with Bob, huh?
It was. I really appreciate when he's on, and yeah, election season is always important, and like you said, it's important for a lot of our overseas visitors to kind of get a scope of what's happening here with all the political rhetoric. What can that do to our investments and things like that? And my personal belief on that whole thing is that at some point this rhetoric is going to get toned down once we get down to the final candidates that are selected by the various conventions and stuff to be running. They're going to sound a little bit more normal, because they realize that now they're in the position where they have to work with the Congress to try and get measures passed, not so much they think they could promise just to get the nomination.
Yeah, and so we'll the debates, man. I'll tell you this: the next 8 months are going to be one for the history books for sure. They
Exactly.
really are.
Yeah.
They really are. Well, Steve, thanks for stepping in for Kip today. I know Kip, he was not feeling good after his trip to Las Vegas. I have a feeling he's probably was in an, you're in Vegas, you're around a lot of people. There's a lot of germs there. He probably didn't wash his hands before he ate one time, and it might have got him. So thanks for stepping in today.
Or whatever stuff was on the money, the
Right?
bills.
Yeah, that's right. He's licking his fingers. Licking. Anyway, all right, guys. Thanks for being here, Steve. I will see you in